So your prompt today is create a visual representation of your graphic novel illustrating your assigned short story, the main character of your journey. Each of you has a different story, so each of you will have a different journey to follow. This will be good for us because we're not going to watch the same hero's journey. If we all did Jonas, it would be pretty boring when we get out there to present, okay? So that's why all of you have multiple stories that you're going to do. We're relating it to the hero's journey. How many steps total are there in a hero's journey? 10. How many are you required to make sure you have on your comic? 6. So 3 each, all right? So using the film techniques that we've already talked about, framing, angling, and lining, and then some color to capture the mood of the scenes. We're also going to use dialogue bubbles and thought bubbles. And for those of you who are not familiar with comics, I will show you kind of what I mean by that, and narrative captions. So we're going to go through what those are. That way when you do move on to your next step, which is your rough draft, okay, of the pictures, you know what I'm expecting to have you do. All right. So what are the elements of a graphic novel? How many of you in here have read a comic book before? Seen a comic book before? Looked at the comics in the newspaper? Okay, so we know what a comic is. They include dialogue, using dialogue bubbles, okay, like they're little things that you can see what the characters are saying, narrative captions to help us understand what's going on in the scene, and creative use of filming techniques, which means how they chose to use the framing, how they chose to use the angling, what they chose to do with lighting. Thoughtful use of space, style characters, and sensory details. Now, are you going to find the exact character you're looking for if I'm giving you a website to do this? Probably not, but it's a good start for you, okay? So, what is dialogue? Dialogue is a conversation between characters, okay? Can more than 2 characters be involved in dialogue? Yeah, you can have a conversation with more than one person at a time, right? Yeah, but it has to involve 2 characters at least, otherwise it's called a monologue. In a regular book, we can recognize dialogue by what kind of marks? Quotation marks. For example, well, Johnny, you know how I feel about rabbits, Mom reminded. Johnny refused to be convinced though and pleaded, but Mom, I promise I'll keep it from eating the newspaper. We notice that there are quotation marks. Well, in comic books or graphic novels, there's not quotation marks. There's dialogue bubbles, and that's how we know that they're talking. What shape is this?
It's a question.
It's like a oval, okay, and it has kind of this line coming down to notate that we are talking. If it's going to be a thought bubble, it will look more like a cloud, and we'll go over that in a second. There are no quotation marks, however, when we do a dialogue bubble. So even when you're bringing in your text evidence, the text evidence I'm checking is on your first sheet. When you pull the text evidence over to your comic book, we're not using the author's name and page number or something like that. It will just look like what you see on the screen. Dialogue bubbles are lots of different shapes. You can choose a square, a circle, or kind of this odd shaped square, but a thought bubble is more like this cloud looking thing, like they're thinking about something. And that's how we know the difference between the two. Dialogue. If more than one person is talking and they're going back and forth in the conversation, we have dialogue bubbles that are read from left to right and then from the top of the page down. Is there a problem? So this pattern shows the clear order of the speaker. So number 1 you would read first, then number 2, and then down to number 3. Usually there's not more than 3 bubbles on one page, simply because then it fills up the page and you need to have room for your characters, okay? In Springboard, page 91 will help you look at kind of what this looks like up close. Okay, page 91 helps you look at that up close. So when you get yours to reference back to, you will see what it's talking about here, and you will be able to look at thought bubbles and kind of in the order. So this gives you a good representation of what a comic looks like if you're kind of in question there. All right. In our short stories, you can use anything the character said out loud as a dialogue bubble. The rest of the stuff, the explanation, is going to be more of a narrative caption. A thought bubble is what the character is thinking, and sometimes we need to know what the character is thinking because we want to know what the character is doing. Thought bubbles look more like clouds and have kind of these little circle things here, okay? Whereas dialogue bubbles, when they're talking, look different, and that's how we know the distinction. So you don't actually have to put he thought to himself, it will automatically, you'll know because of the shape. So, this is a
Thought bubble.
thought bubble because
Cloud.
The cloud is.
this is a
Speech
speech bubble or a dialogue bubble because it looks more like a
Square.
or a circle. Good. So, on your short story flow map, it's this page right here, you are going to pick scenes to elaborate on. You're elaborating on different parts of the hero's journey. You and your partner are going to have to decide, do we need dialogue bubbles? Do we need thought bubbles? What do we need so that the audience, which is you, okay, when you're listening to your and me, how are they going to understand the story? Because you're going to assume that none of them have read the story before. Okay, you'll assume that I've never read the story before. You will need to either add a dialogue bubble or a thought bubble to most scenes that you do. So you'll go to the text from that scene and identify the quoted dialogue. You've picked out text for each thing, each part of hero's journey. That will help you out. That's why you're picking that out. And down here at the bottom, it also gives you, okay, well, what dialogue are you going to use? Okay? So here's journey step, what angle, framing, lighting, and dialogue. It's all on there for you so you do not forget. Narrative captions. A narrative caption is what the other thing we were talking about. And it helps the reader understand what is going on in the drawing. Andrew, stop. This might include background information of what happened before, what's going on at that certain time, or what's going to happen next. This should be very brief. You're not telling me a story, you're just explaining one part of this story. In your graphic novel, you'll demonstrate the ability to embed the quotes into this, okay? So it's something that can be pulled. So in your 6 that you're in charge of, you're doing 3, and you must embed 2 pieces of text evidence from your story. So that's 4 total, 2 each, okay? Now, stop with the clicking. Narrative captions are usually at the top of your comic. They're usually more rectangular. They have more words rather than dialogue bubbles, which are connected to your characters. They help explain what's going on. For instance, Cap acts quickly to tranquilize the gun, happy pedestrian. The dialogue bubbles can explain what they're saying. Little sleep will do wonders for you. He's saying that to that character. This was, and then this flat is kind of your sound technique. Okay? So this is more of your hero, superhero type, even though your heroes are going on a journey of coming of age. Okay? So, in this picture, which one is the narrative caption and which one's dialogue? What is this?
Oh, that's not
Dialogue. This is dialogue. What is this? Narrative. What is this? A thought bubble, or we would say a dialogue bubble. Okay? So, finally, his meditation comes to an end. Then Molly remains completely motionless. A sharp, commanding thought rings out, echoing through the great halls of the building. It's explaining to us that this is more than just a man sitting in a chair. We have to have this explanation because you may not know who Professor X is. And then it goes on to explain what the X is needing to do and that they're required to be in their class right now. Okay? So the difference in a narrative caption and a dialogue bubble, who can tell me? Difference in the narrative caption, Gavin, what is it?
Narrative is to like tell you what's really going on, and dialogue is like conversation.
Very good. Narrative's telling you what's going on, and dialogue is telling us the conversation between the people.
Yummy. Trash is over.
All right.
Crap.
On your flow map, the trash from here.
Oh.
This is the trash. That's the recycling.
Oh, wait.
Alright, so on your flow map of your short story, you're going to identify the scenes that are going to need the narrative captions. They may not all need narrative captions, but some of them will. This is also a place where you can embed your text evidence, because you need 2 pieces of text evidence in your boxes. It is more of a box instead of a bubble. Alright.